So today we're going to learn about solving quadratics by factoring. Now I'm going to combine factoring and solving all into one video. So to solve a quadratic by factoring, the first thing we need to do is we need to set our equation equal to 0. After that, we need to factor that quadratic that we have set equal to 0. And then after we factor, we set each parenthesis or each factor equal to 0, and we'll solve that for x. This is also what we call finding the roots. So our first step here is we need to get this quadratic equal to 0. So to do that, we need to get everything on one side. So I'm going to subtract 48 here, and I'm going to add 2x here. So now we have x squared plus 2x minus 48 equals 0. Now, our first step here is what we want to do is we want to factor this. So when we factor, we want to look at our c here, our c value, our constant. Our constant here is 48. We want to find factors of 48. So it means two numbers that multiply to 48 that gives us a positive 2. So let's just list all the factors of 48. So we have 1 and 48, 2 and 24, 3 and 16, 4 and 12, and 6 and 8. Now we need to look at these numbers here and see what gives us what we can do to get a positive 2. Well, if we look here, 6 and 8 can get us a positive 2 when 8 is negative and 6 is positive, because we also need these two numbers to multiply to a negative 48. So set up by parentheses here, and we have x plus 6 and x minus 8 equals 0. So that's how we factor. We want to look at our c constant. We see it's negative 48. Well, let's just look at 48 itself. Find factors of 48 that are going to add up to positive 2, and when they're multiplied gives you a negative 48. So 6 times negative 8 is negative 48, and 6 plus a negative 8 is positive 2. Sorry, the 8 should be positive, 6 should be negative. So we should have x minus 6 and x plus 8. So when we multiply negative 6 and 8 together, we get negative 48. When we add them together, we get positive 2. Now we need to want to solve this. So to solve this, we set each parenthesis equal to 0. So I can set x minus 6 equal to 0 and x plus 8 equal to 0. Alright, now all we have to do is solve for x. So I'm going to add 6 each side, and I get x equals 6. And subtract 8 from each side, I get x equals negative 8. So when we're solving, we need to see an x equals. When we are factoring, we just stop right here at this step with the two parentheses. And we have two answers because it's an x squared right here. The exponent tells us what we're gonna, or how many answers we're gonna have. So since we have an x squared, we're on two answers. So this whole chapter, when we're dealing with quadratics, we should always have two answers. Once again, our first step is to get everything on one side. Now I see my x squared term here is negative. To make our lives easier, let's make sure our x squared term is positive. So let's take everything to the other side. So we'll have x squared plus 9x plus 8 equals 0. Now we need to factor this. So let's look at our c term. Our c term is 8. We need factors of 8. So we have 1 and 8 and 2 and 4. Now out of these factors here, we need a combination of two numbers that adds up to 9. Well, 2 and 4 is not going to get us 9. 8 and 1 will get us 9. So we have x plus 1 and x plus 8 equals 0. Now we factor this, okay? But we were solving here. we're solving, so we're not done. So we gotta set each parenthesis equal to 0. So x plus 1 equals 0, and x plus 8 equals 0. Now solve for x in each one. So x equals negative 1, and x equals negative 8. If you look at this and this, we see that our 8 here is positive and our 8 here is negative. So we can skip this whole step. This step's really not even needed. We can skip that whole step by just saying, well, if this is a positive 8 and we need this parenthesis right here to equal 0, well, what can we plug in for x to get this to be 0? Well, negative 8. So we always think opposite. So if we're looking inside this parenthesis, we see a positive 8, we know x is going to equal negative 8. Same thing over here. We see that x equals negative 1. Well, we have a positive 1 here, so our values are just opposite there. So, here we don't have a middle term. We don't have an x term. Therefore, our x term is 0. So we need factors of negative 9 that are going to add up to 0. Well, the only factors of 9 are 1 and 9 and 3 and 3. So 1 and 9 cannot get a 0 in any way, so we can cross out those. So we're going to look at 3 and 3. Well, how can 3 and 3 multiply to negative 9 and when added gets us 0? Well, you just make one of them negative. So we have x plus 3 and x minus 3. Okay, so if we want to find the roots of this, once again, set each parenthesis equal to 0. And without even doing this, I can tell you that the answers are going to be 3 and negative 3 because we just got to change the signs inside the parenthesis here. So x equals negative 3 and x equals 3. And that's our final answer for that one. Once again, our first step, we need to get everything to one side, but first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change these n's to x's. I made a mistake when I typed this in, so let's change our n's to x's. Now I'm going to add 2x so I can get everything to one side. So x squared plus 4x minus 32 equals 0. Okay, so first step, once again, we want to factor this. I'll factor this using the box method. So with the box method, our first step is to put our x squared in the top left hand corner and our c term, negative 32, in the bottom right hand corner. Next step is to multiply these two boxes together. And multiplying together we get negative 32x squared. Now, we need to find factors of 32. So factors of 32 are 1 and 32, 2 and 16, and 4 and 8. Okay, and we know factors of x squared are just going to be x and x, so we just add an x to all of these. Now, looking at these pairs here, we need to find a pair that adds up to positive 4, and when multiplied gets us a negative 32. Well, you can see that 4 and 8 are the only ones that can get us to 4, but one of them needs to be negative, one of them needs to be positive, because when we multiply we get a negative. But we need a positive 4 when they add them, so that means the 8 is going to be positive and the 4 is going to be negative. So go and take these two numbers and put them in any box. It doesn't matter what box they go in. Now we need to factor out of the first column. So if we look at the first column, all we can factor out is an x. If we look at the second column, we can factor out an 8. If we look at this top row here, we can factor out an x. And this bottom row here, we can factor out a negative 4. So our factors are x plus 8 and x minus 4. So whatever we put into this box right here, that's what we're going to factor out up here. Whatever we put in this box right here, that's what we're going to factor out right here. Okay, so now we need to solve this. So we're going to get x equals negative 8 and x equals 4. because all we have to do is change these signs. Okay, so now we're going to talk about finding the zeros. When we find the zeros, that means we're finding the x-intercepts. So first thing we want to do is we want to graph this quadratic here. And to find the vertex, we use a little formula of negative b over 2a for our x value. So our x value, we're going to negative b over 2a, which is 6 over 2, which equals 3. So our vertex is going to be 3, and we got to find the y value. To find the y value, we just need to plug 3 into this equation. So 3 squared is 9. 3 times 6 is 18 plus 8. That comes out to negative 1. So our vertex is going to be 3, negative 1. So I'm going to plot that point and label it as my vertex and draw on my axis of symmetry. Now if we look here, our y-intercept is 8. So I'm going to go plot that and then plot the reflection point and draw on my parabola. Now if you look at my graph here, this graph kind of crosses at the x-axis at the x equals 2 and x equals 4. So we're going to find out if that's really true. So what we have to do is we have to solve this right here. So let's factor it. So if we factor it, we have x times x. So we can do that. Now we need to find factors of 8, two numbers that multiply to 8, and when added gives us a negative 6. Well, if we look, 2 and 4 can get us to 6. They both have to be negative, so you plug them in here. So x minus 2 and x minus 4. Now if we look at this, what is x going to equal? Well, x is going to equal 2 and 4. So since x equals 2 and 4, that's telling us where our parabola is going to cross the x-axis. Well, let's check our graph. Well, our graph crosses at 2 and it crosses at 4, so we're good. So when we're finding the zeros, all it means is that we're finding where the parabola crosses the x-axis. Alright, last one here, and then if you want to see the rest of the examples, you will have to go and look at the notes that are filled out to get all of those. But this is the last one that I'm going to do in this video. So once again, we need to factor this. So you can go ahead and fill in your x's right away. Now we need factors of 16 that when added gets us negative 8. So we have 1 and 16, 2 and 8, and 4 and 4. Well, if we look here, there's only one way that we can get 8 when we add these numbers, and that's these 4s. Now we need a negative 8, so they're both going to have to be negative. So if we multiply negative 4 times negative 4, that's going to get us a positive 16. So go ahead and fill these in. Now you see that we have x minus 4 times x minus 4. So we can also write that as x minus 4 squared. Okay? That means our answer is going to be x equals 4. Now I said since we're solving for quadratics and our exponent here is 2, that we have to have 2 answers for all of them. Well, here we only have one answer. So that tells us that this point right here, that this parabola only crosses the x-axis at one point, which means our vertex is going to be at 4, 0. So that's why we only have one answer in some of these. It's because if we only have one answer for x, that means that our vertex is on the x-axis. So it only crosses the x-axis one time. One more thing I want to remind you of is you can check your answers for all of these, remember. If we're just foiling, which means, or if we're just factoring, that means this is what we end up with. To check to see if this is right, all you have to do is FOIL or distribute it to see if you arrive at this quadratic right here. Okay? Now if we want to check to see if our answer for x is right, then all we need to do is plug this in to this equation, and if we get 0, then we know it's right.